What happens when one of country music's biggest stars walks onto a daytime talk show stage, expecting a friendly conversation about his new album, only to be blindsided by personal attacks and political accusations that cross every line imaginable? In just 39 seconds of on-air chaos, Joy Behar's relentless provocation would push Blake Shelton past his breaking point, sparking a clash so explosive that producers would be forced to cut to commercial while security scrambled to restore order. Blake Shelton arrived at the View Studios that morning in good spirits. He'd been making the rounds promoting his latest country album, and the appearance was supposed to be light, fun, maybe a little music talk, some laughs about his time on The Voice. He walked out onto that stage, smiling, waving to the audience, shaking hands with the panel. Whoopi Goldberg sat in the center, flanked by Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Sunny Hostin, and Alyssa Farah Griffin. The crowd cheered as Blake settled into the guest chair, adjusting his microphone. "Welcome, welcome," Whoopi said warmly. "Great to have you here, Blake. Thanks for coming." "Thanks for having me," Blake replied, his Oklahoma drawl easy and relaxed. "Always good to be in New York." The first few minutes went smoothly. They talked about his new songs, his tour dates, some funny stories from recording sessions. Sarah asked about his life in Oklahoma, and Blake lit up talking about his ranch, his animals, the simple life away from the spotlight. The audience was engaged, laughing at his stories. Everything seemed normal. Then Joy Behar leaned forward. "So, Blake," she began, her tone shifting slightly, "you're from Oklahoma, right? Pretty red state. I'm curious about your politics. You seem like a smart guy, but you must know that people from your part of the country, well, they're not exactly known for being on the right side of history." The studio went quiet. Blake's smile faltered just a bit. He shifted in his seat. "I don't really get into politics much," he said carefully. "I'm just here to talk about music." Joy wasn't backing down. "Oh, come on. You can't just hide from it. Your fans, they're probably all, the kind of people who don't believe in science, who want to take away people's rights. Doesn't that bother you?" Sunny Hostin jumped in, trying to redirect. "Joy, I think we should focus on the album. Blake, tell us about the inspiration behind the new songs." But Joy cut her off. "No, I think this is important. We have a responsibility to call out this kind of thing. Blake, do you support politicians who want to oppress people?" Blake's jaw tightened. "I support making good music and treating people with respect. I don't appreciate you making assumptions about me or my fans." "I'm not making assumptions," Joy shot back. "I'm looking at facts. People from rural America, they vote a certain way, they believe certain things. Are you telling me you're different?" Whoopi tried to intervene. "Joy, let's maybe take this down a notch." "Why?" Joy turned to Whoopi. "Why do we have to tiptoe around this? He comes on our show. He should be able to answer basic questions about his values." Alyssa spoke up. "I think there's a difference between asking about values and making sweeping generalizations about entire groups of people." Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Please, we all know what we're talking about here." Blake leaned forward now, his easygoing demeanor completely gone. "You know what, Joy? I came here to have a conversation, not to be lectured about who I am or where I'm from. You don't know me. You don't know my fans. And frankly, the way you're talking right now shows a lot more prejudice than anything you're accusing me of." The audience gasped. Joy's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising. "I'm prejudiced? I'm fighting for people's rights while you sit there representing a culture that wants to drag us backward." "See, there you go again," Blake said, his voice firm but controlled. "You're painting millions of people with the same brush. You think everyone who lives outside of New York or Los Angeles is some kind of villain. That's prejudice, Joy. That's exactly what it is." Sarah tried to jump in. "Let's all just take a breath here." But Joy wasn't finished. I have every right to question someone who profits off of a fan base that supports dangerous ideologies. Your music, your brand, it's all wrapped up in this culture of ignorance. Blake stood up abruptly, his microphone still attached. Ignorance? You want to talk about ignorance? You just called millions of hardworking Americans ignorant because they don't live the way you think they should live. You sit up here in your bubble, making your judgments, acting like you're better than everyone else. I am better than people who support hatred, Joy fired back, standing as well. Whoopi raised her voice. Okay, everyone needs to calm down. Right now. Sonny added, this is getting out of hand. But Blake was done. You know what the real problem is, Joy? It's people like you who claim to be tolerant, but are the most intolerant people in the room. You preach acceptance, but you can't accept that someone might see the world differently than you. You talk about rights, but you don't respect my right to live my life without being attacked for where I'm from. Joy pointed at him. You're deflecting. This isn't about tolerance. This is about right and wrong. And what you represent is wrong. What I represent? Blake's voice grew louder. I represent country music. I represent people who work hard, who love their families, who believe in community. You're so caught up in your own self-righteousness that you can't see past your own nose. Alyssa stood up. Blake, Joy, please. Joy stepped closer. Don't you dare talk to me about self-righteousness. I've spent my career fighting for people who don't have a voice. And I've spent mine giving people something to smile about, something to connect over, Blake countered. But apparently that's not good enough for you because I don't pass your little purity test. The audience was completely silent now, watching the confrontation unfold. Whoopi stood between them. We need to go to commercial, she said firmly. But Joy kept going. You can run away, Blake, but you can't run from the truth. Your fans, your lifestyle, it's all part of the problem in this country. Blake's face turned red. My fans are good people. They're teachers and nurses and farmers and veterans. They're people who would give you the shirt off their back if you needed it. And you're sitting here trashing them on national television because you think you're morally superior. You're not superior, Joy. You're just mean. Mean? Joy laughed bitterly. I'm mean for calling out what's wrong with this country. No, you're mean for attacking a guest on your show for no reason other than where he's from and what kind of music he makes. That's bullying, Joy. Plain and simple. Sarah stood now too. Blake has a point, Joy. This has gone way too far. Joy whirled on Sarah. Don't you start. Sonny spoke firmly. Joy, you need to stop. This isn't productive. But Joy was on a roll. She turned back to Blake. You know what your problem is? You're too comfortable. You've never had to fight for anything. You just coast along with your privilege while the rest of us do the real work. Blake shook his head in disbelief. You think I haven't fought for anything? You think success just fell into my lap? I've worked my entire life to get where I am. I've dealt with rejection, failure, heartbreak, all of it. But unlike you, I don't wear my struggles like a badge so I can look down on other people. This is unbelievable, Joy said. You're actually playing the victim right now. I'm not playing anything, Blake said. I'm standing up for myself and for people who can't. Stand up to people like you. You use this platform to bully anyone who doesn't agree with you, and you hide behind the excuse that you're fighting for justice. But really, you're just fighting to hear yourself talk. Whoopi put her hand on Blake's arm. Blake, I think we need to take a break. He pulled away gently. No, Whoopi, I'm done. I don't need a break. I need to leave. Joy scoffed. Of course you're leaving. That's what people like you do when confronted with the truth. Blake turned to face her one more time. The truth? You wouldn't know the truth if it hit you in the face. All you know is your own opinion, and you think that's enough. Well, it's not. And I'm not going to stand here and let you disrespect me, my fans, or my home anymore. He started removing his microphone. A producer rushed onto the stage, looking panicked. "Blake, please," Sarah said softly. "Don't go like this." He looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. "Sarah, I appreciate you, trying to keep the peace. But I have to draw a line. I won't be talked to like this." Joy threw her hands up. "Oh, here we go. The dramatic exit. Very mature, Blake." He stopped and turned back. "You want to talk about maturity, Joy? A mature person knows how to have a disagreement without resorting to insults. A mature person can listen to someone else's perspective without immediately attacking them. A mature person doesn't use their position on a television show to demean and belittle their guests." "I didn't demean you," Joy protested. "I asked you legitimate questions." "No," Blake said firmly. "You attacked me from the moment you opened your mouth. You didn't ask questions. You made accusations. You didn't want a conversation. You wanted a fight. Well, congratulations. You got one." Alyssa spoke up. "Joy, he's right. You came at him really hard, right from the start." Joy rounded on her. "Not you too, Alyssa." "I'm just being honest," Alyssa said. "This wasn't fair to..." "Him," Sonny nodded. "I have to agree. This conversation went sideways fast, and it didn't need to." Joy looked around at her co-hosts, clearly angry that they weren't backing her up. "I can't believe this. I'm the one trying to hold people accountable, and you're all acting like I'm the bad guy." "You're acting like the bad guy," Blake said quietly, "because you are being the bad guy. Not everyone who disagrees with you is evil, Joy. Not everyone who lives differently than you is your enemy. But you can't see that because you're so convinced of your own righteousness." Whoopi sighed deeply. "Blake, I'm sorry this happened." He nodded at her. "I appreciate that, Whoopi. I really do. But I can't stay here." The audience watched in stunned silence as Blake fully removed his microphone and handed it to a stage assistant. Joy stood with her arms crossed, her face flushed. "You're making a huge mistake," Joy called out as he turned to walk away. Blake stopped one more time, looking, back over his shoulder. "The only mistake I made was thinking I could have a respectful conversation here. I won't make that mistake again." "Good," Joy snapped. "We don't need people like you on this show anyway." Sarah put her head in her hands. Sonny shook her head. Alyssa looked uncomfortable. Whoopi just stared at Joy in disbelief. Blake walked toward the exit, his boots heavy on the studio floor. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the unprecedented scene. Producers were shouting into their headsets, trying to figure out what to do. "Cut to commercial," Whoopi finally said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to cut to commercial right now." But before they could, Joy had one more thing to say. "Run back to Oklahoma, Blake. Run back to your bubble, where everyone thinks like you, and you never have to face reality." Blake stopped at the edge of the stage. The entire studio held its breath. He turned slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was measured, but filled with emotion. "Joy, I feel sorry for you. I really do. Because you live in a world where you think attacking people makes you righteous, where you think being cruel makes you strong, where you think shutting down conversation makes you right. That's a sad way to live. And one day, you're going to realize that all this anger, all this bitterness, it didn't change anything. It just made you lonely." With that, he walked off the stage and out of the studio. The sound of the heavy door closing echoed through the silent space. Joy stood there, breathing hard, her face a mixture of anger and something else that might have been shame, though she'd never admit it. The other hosts looked at each other, unsure of what to say or do. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was bad. That was really bad." Sonny nodded. "I've never seen anything like that." Alyssa looked directly at Joy. "You pushed him too far. You know that, right?" Joy's defenses went up, immediately. "He's the one who couldn't handle a simple conversation. That wasn't simple, Whoopi said, her tone sharp. That was an ambush, and you know it. I was doing my job, Joy insisted. Your job isn't to berate our guests, Whoopi shot back. Your job is to have interesting conversations that our audience wants to watch. What just happened? Nobody wanted to watch that. The audience, which had been silent throughout the exchange, began to murmur. Some people were shaking their heads. Others looked upset. A few were already gathering their things to leave. Joy looked out at them, perhaps finally realizing how badly things had gone. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. If people can't handle tough questions, they shouldn't come on television, she said to the audience. A woman in the third row stood up. That wasn't tough questions. That was just mean. Another person called out, You didn't even give him a chance. The murmurs grew louder. More people were standing now, some heading for the exits. The producers were in full panic mode. Sarah turned to the camera. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. But as the commercial break signal finally came, everyone knew that things would never be quite the same. The damage was done. Blake Shelton had walked off The View, and he'd done it because he refused to be disrespected on national television. Backstage, Blake was already in his dressing room, gathering his things. His manager was on the phone, fielding calls. His publicist was trying to figure out how to handle the situation. But Blake himself seemed calm, almost relieved. That needed to happen, he said to his team. I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself. Meanwhile, back on the set, the hosts were having a heated discussion during the commercial break. Whoopi was clearly upset with Joy. Sarah and Sunny were trying to mediate. Alyssa was staying out of it, but her body language made her feelings clear. You can't treat guests like that, Whoopi said firmly. I don't care what your political views are. You can't treat people like that. Joy's arms were still crossed. He's the one who got defensive. Because you attacked him, Sarah said. From the very first political question, you were attacking him. I was asking legitimate questions about his values, Joy maintained. No, Sunny said. You were making assumptions about his values based on where he's from and what kind of music he makes. That's not the same thing. The stage manager gave them a 30-second warning. They all moved back to their seats, but the tension was visible. When the cameras came back on, Whoopi's face was serious. We're back, she said, and we need to address what just happened. Our guest, Blake Shelton, has left the building, and I think we owe our audience an explanation. Joy started to speak, but Whoopi held up her hand. I'll handle this, Whoopi said. What you just witnessed was a conversation that got out of hand. Emotions ran high. Words were said, and our guest felt disrespected enough to leave. That's on us. That's on this show. And I apologize to Blake and to all of you watching. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but said nothing. Sarah nodded. I think we all could have handled that better. These are difficult topics, and sometimes passion can override professionalism. But there's a line, Sunny added, and I think today we crossed it. Alyssa spoke carefully. I hope Blake knows that not everyone at this table agreed with how that conversation went. The audience applauded at that, a clear signal of where their sympathies lay. Whoopi nodded. We're going to take some time to reflect on what happened here today, and we hope that Blake will accept our apology. Joy finally spoke. I stand by my questions, but perhaps my delivery could have been different. It was the closest thing to an apology she could muster, and everyone knew it. The show moved on to other topics, but the energy was completely different. The fun, lively atmosphere that usually characterized The View was gone, replaced by an awkward tension that lasted the rest of the episode. In the dressing room, Blake finished packing his bag. He took one last look around the space, shook his head, and walked out. As he left the building, a few audience members who had walked out during the confrontation were waiting. They applauded as he emerged. Good for you, one woman said. "You didn't deserve that." "Thank you for standing up for regular people like us," a man added. Blake smiled genuinely for the first time since the interview started. "I appreciate that. Really." He signed a few autographs, took a couple of photos, and then climbed into his waiting car. As it pulled away from the studio, he looked back one more time at the building, then forward toward whatever came next. He'd come to the View expecting a pleasant interview about his music. He'd left as a man who'd drawn a line in the sand, who'd refused to be bullied, who'd stood up not just for himself, but for millions of people who felt constantly judged and dismissed by coastal elites who thought they knew better. The confrontation with Joy Behar had lasted less than 10 minutes from start to finish, but it had felt like an eternity. And in that brief window of time, Blake Shelton had shown that sometimes the most important thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to treat you with basic respect. Back in the studio, as the show wrapped up, the hosts sat in silence during the final commercial break. They all knew this would be the talk of the town, that clips would circulate, that think pieces would be written, that social media would explode. But in that moment, sitting at that table, they were just 5 women dealing with the aftermath of a conversation gone horribly wrong. Joy finally spoke. "Do you all really think I was that out of line?" The others exchanged glances. Sarah answered gently, but honestly. "Yeah, Joy, I do." Sunny nodded. "It wasn't your finest moment." Even Whoopi, who usually tried to keep the peace, said simply, "You went too far." Joy sat back in her chair, processing this. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. She just sat there, perhaps finally understanding that her approach had backfired spectacularly. As the final segment ended and the show signed off, the audience filed out quietly. Usually there was chatter and energy, but today people left subdued, processing what they had witnessed. Some were on their phones already, texting friends and family about the drama they'd just seen live. The View had always been known for heated debates and strong opinions, but what happened with Blake Shelton was different. It wasn't a debate between the hosts. It was a one-sided attack on a guest who'd come in good faith, and it had ended with that guest walking out mid-show, something that almost never happened in television. Blake's car headed toward the airport. His phone was blowing up with messages from friends, fellow artists, and supporters, but he ignored them for now. He just wanted to get home, to get back to Oklahoma, to get back to the place where people knew him and didn't make assumptions about who he was based on stereotypes and prejudices. The irony wasn't lost on him. Joy had accused him and his fans of being prejudiced, of being on the wrong side of history, of supporting dangerous ideologies. But in doing so, she'd shown her own prejudices, her own narrow-minded view of anyone who didn't live in a major city or share her exact worldview. She'd proven his point better than he ever could have himself. As the plane took off, Blake looked out the window at New York City getting smaller below him. He thought about the confrontation, about whether he could have handled it differently, about whether he should have just smiled and deflected. But no, he'd done the right thing. Sometimes you have to stand up. Sometimes you have to draw a line. Sometimes you have to walk away. And that's exactly what Blake Shelton did. He walked away from the View, from Joy Behar's attacks, from a conversation that had stopped being a conversation the moment it started. He walked away with his dignity intact and his principles unchallenged. And in doing so, he sent a message that resonated far beyond that television studio. A message that you don't have to accept being disrespected, no matter who's doing the disrespecting or what platform they're using to do it.